I am sitting with Fatima Giliam, who has left her lucrative Wall Street law career to build her own consulting empire. She figured out how to turn the understanding of power dynamics into a competitive business edge.
One thing that's critical is people don't realize they have as much power as they actually have. Don't negotiate against yourself. Just claim your power. That is one of my superpowers, being a bomb-ass negotiator, and I'm a truth sayer. Some partners at some firms make like $20-25 million a year, but some of these people are morally bankrupt. They are worshiping at the foot of power or perceived power, which could be totally ripped away if just a few factors in the equation get tweaked. I don't say what they want to hear. I say what they need to hear. I remember speaking with a client that was a Fortune 50 company. FYI, you need to fire this person.
What the American dream means, what excites you.
What gives me hope in spite of all that, where you have scholars saying that our democracy may not survive 2025, right, at the pace that we're going. And I'm still pushing back.
I am sitting with Fatima Giliam, who has left her lucrative Wall Street law career to build her own consulting empire. Columbia Law, Harvard Kennedy School, corporate attorney at one of the most prestigious firms in the world. But here's what makes her different. She figured out how to turn the understanding of power dynamics into a competitive business edge. This is Confluently. I'm Tiffany Hart, and we cut through the bullshit and get to know how influence actually works. All right, let's just dive in, Fatima. Influence, power, and how it actually works.
You know, I would say, I like to consider myself a resolutionary. I solve conflict for people and organizations. I'm a negotiator. And in terms of influence, I think one thing that's critical is people don't realize they have as much power as they actually have. They second guess themselves. And one thing that I say to people, my clients all the time is don't negotiate against yourself. You'll have people that are trying to figure out what they're going to ask for, what they want in a negotiation. And they sit there and lower and degrade their ask. And it's like, let the other side do that. Why are you doing their job for them? Just claim your power. Don't ask, don't get. And so I think that's really important for people to think about that. I remember one time I was negotiating, and I was an associate and negotiating with the partner on behalf of our client, and our client was there on the other side, practicing law. I just was getting so frustrated because we were in this negotiation, and our client and the partner was just giving away the store. I mean, they were just conceding on things and indicating that they were willing to buckle. And then, and here I was the junior associate or mid-level associate on this. And I said, hey, can we take a break? They were like, yeah, sure, let's take a break. We go to a breakout conference room. And I was like, why are we caving? Really, why are we caving? I don't understand. You have way more leverage than you think right now. It wasn't the partner. And the partner actually was glad that I did it. And I was like, why are we giving this up? And so we went back into the negotiation room and we're able to get so much more for our client. One, because we stopped negotiating ourselves and caving. And two, that conversation that I had with the client and the partner boosted the confidence level on our side. And there are definitely times when you don't have the amount of influence that you think you have or that you hope you have, and you do have to cave, but that was not one of them. Even still, when you don't have as much influence, then people just need to get creative about where they think they can move the needle, where they have they don't think they necessarily have leverage. Sometimes that requires getting a little Machiavellian and building up alliances behind the scenes to figure out where you can put pressure on another side to effectively get what you want. And organizations get what they want. I'm not trying to play checkers. I'm playing chess. And sometimes you have to go nuclear to get what you want.
I love that because I often say, and literally my last podcast said, most people are playing checkers while everyone else is playing chess. And one of the most critical things, especially being the person that I am, I try to tell others, know your worth, then add tax and currently tariffs to that bottom line. Never go below that. So you've been to Columbia Law School, clearly lived on Wall Street, and you were on the golden path as most of us would see, right? And what was the moment that you really realized that you need to basically burn it all down and do something different, because you really did?
I always knew that I didn't want to be a traditional Wall Street corporate attorney. I did my undergrad at Wellesley. From there, I went to the Kennedy School, got a master in public policy, right? So already indicating that I'm interested in bigger issues beyond what corporate America has to offer, and then went to Columbia Law School. My goal and desire in going to Columbia Law School was not to work for a law firm like Cleary Gottlieb. And then after that, I worked for Manat, Phelps and Phillips. That was not my goal, right? My goal was that I wanted to work in the government. I wanted to draft legislation. I wanted to influence policy. But at a certain point, you're like, okay, wow, going to Seven Sisters and two Ivy League institutions, you kind of rack up some student loans along the way. So I went to a traditional law firm to pay down my debt. And also because I recognized that I was going to get critical training that I wasn't going to get someplace else. Right. I went there like always knowing that I was working on what I called Operation Workplace Freedom, my own black ops to get out. And so I wasn't there trying to be partner. That was not a goal. I looked at the partners. I was like, your life sucks. Okay. I'm here at midnight. You're here at midnight and you're 60. This is for the birds. Okay. I'm not trying to do that. So I always knew. It was also then a journey of trying to figure out the roles where I could be more of myself. I went to Cleary, which there are, many great things about my time there. Then I went to Manat because I thought, well, maybe if I change who my clients are and they're not always Goldman Sachs, maybe I might enjoy this a little bit better. No, not the case. But I gave it a go. And then from there, went to Citigroup. And for Citi, I oversaw campus diversity recruiting for all of Citi's businesses. So that was from like capital markets to the investment bank to the Citi, the Citi card business, like all of that. So that was moving closer to like my political ideologies and how I wanted to have impact. After I did that role for a number of years, I didn't see anything else that I wanted to do at Citigroup, right? Like, I felt like I had the impact that I could have. I was ready for something different. And a lot of people in that position would be like, oh, let me find some other kind of role in Citigroup. No, nothing appealed to me. I went to the United Nations, because I really wanted to scratch like my public sector Kennedy School itch. And so for the United Nations World Food Program, which is the world's largest humanitarian relief organization fighting hunger, I oversaw corporate partnerships for North America. And so there I was able to, help them build from the ground up, becoming operational in the United States. I did some interesting deals. Like I negotiated a deal with 50 Cent, the rapper. I also negotiated a partnership with the Hunger Game film franchise. In addition to the traditional ones that we would go after, like Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Campbell's, like food companies. I did these interesting entertainment type deals and then decided to start my own consulting practice, and which I started over 10 years ago. And that was around being effective at getting what they want, whether that was them negotiating something, whether that was dealing with, conflict or around like a leadership or a talent issue or diversity issue. I just saw people struggle. And so I know that I'm a kick-ass negotiator. I've known that ever since I was a kid. That is one of my superpowers, being a bomb-ass negotiator, and is that I'm a truth sayer. I say the truth. I just wanted to be more of my own person. I also find, working in some of these corporate environments or these big institutional environments, the United Nations included, they have very toxic workplace cultures. Again, for the birds. Okay. And so I've had challenges with clients when I go in and I advise them. And sometimes it is a complete dumpster fire within those organizations. But you know what? I don't have to work there every single day. I come back to myself at the end of it. That's a long answer to say, I've always wanted to march to my own drumbeat. I've always wanted to be in control of my own destiny. I have not wanted to have to bend the knee to people that I think are incompetent, petty, and toxic.
I think that everything you said is so powerful, right? But also for a lot of people that are struggling to go ahead and say, you know what? No, that's not a fit. I want something that's more. I want something that aligns with my values, my ethos, and not more importantly, with my skill set and what it is that I'm actually good at.
Yes, there are a lot of people who are stuck with some golden handcuffs. So they are tethered to the role. I mean, it definitely takes courage. There are definitely times, that you go down the path that I'm taking and you take some financial hits, right? Like if I were a partner at a Wall Street firm like at Cleary, I don't know what their per partner earnings are right now. They're probably like 6 million, 7 million a year at some of these law firms. Some partners at some firms make like 20, $25 million a year. Okay. Some of these people I think are morally bankrupt.
Yeah, absolutely.
They are utterly morally bankrupt. It doesn't align. Some of the things that they do and some of the work that they do does not align with my moral code. I've always been a strong-willed individualist ever since I was a little kid. I think I came out of the womb with my own opinion. I come from a family that is non-traditional. So if I decided that I wanted to, I don't know, be a tap dancer on the New York City subway, then my mom would be like, okay, like, I hope you can make that financially viable. So I don't have that familial pressure. My mom was excited that I would go to law school. She wanted me to go to law school, but she also was the same person that when I was working at the firm and miserable was like, you should go to this Buddhist retreat that I went to in New Mexico because I feel like your stress level is too high and you're becoming like more irritable and these things. And like my mother was a freelance journalist that produced documentaries for public radio, and then worked later when I was in high school for a public radio station. And she's written a book on a civil rights attorney, Lauren Miller. She's in the process of finishing her second book. And mind you, my mom is in her 80s, okay? Her first book was published when she was like 70 something, okay? And so she's writing a book now on the Golden State Life Mutual Insurance Company, which was the largest and biggest Black-owned insurance company out in the West, that was in business from like the 30s until the credit crisis around 2008, 2009. My mom has done her own thing. My siblings have done their own thing. So for me to be like, yeah, big law, kick rocks, be like, okay, cool, you're coming to your own. Finally, what are you going to do for the country? What are you going to do to make the world better? That's where I grew up, right? My parents took me to protests when I was in a stroller. And when I was in college and all these places, I was still speaking my mind. I remember I would have this interesting experience when I would start at like a new school. So like I remember, like when I go to Wellesley, right? And I'm coming from Berkeley, California, and I'm clearly a very light-skinned Black American. Well, not clearly Black to lots of people, but lighter than you. And a lot of times people mistake me for being white. So that means I hear all the terrible things that they say. So I remember I go to a new environment and like I'm on the list of like Black students or whatever. And so people know, and they're kind of like, is she going to come to like the Black student events? And then they get to know me and they're like, yo, Fatima's kind of militant. Fatima's in student senate at Wellesley and like she's shaking stuff up. I'm like, yeah, okay. I'm from Berkeley, people. In this book, it's like I have a dual lens, right? So one lens that I have is that of a Black American. And then people think, okay, well, one of my parents is white. No, both of my parents are Black. All four of my grandparents are Black. My family has been here for nearly 400 years since the early 1600s. Okay. But getting to your the point about the book, I wrote it because it's like I have this perspective and lived experience as a Black woman in America. And then I also have this perspective and lived experience as a light-skinned Black woman who isn't always perceived to be that and sometimes thought to be white. And so I wrote a book like ripping off the Band-Aid.
You're coming from extraordinarily corporate, extraordinarily hierarchy, and moving through those different systems. How did each one of those teach you something about how power and larger organizations work?
One thing that I would see routinely and that I'm really seeing now is that a whole lot of people do not have courage. They make choices that may go against their values, and they are not living their values because they are worshiping at the foot of the dollar of power or perceived power, because they have a certain degree of cachet or access, which could be totally ripped away if just a few factors in the equation get tweaked. And so they see themselves as winners of this system or having arrived in this system. And instead, what they do, they are vectors of many of the things that are ailments in society. They are vectors of maybe some of the things that they don't even agree with. You know, if we even look at like what is happening right now in the United States, even for example, with this attack on diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, and you have these companies that were like all for it, and then all of a sudden they're not. What does it really say about not just your character as a corporation or a nonprofit or a university or an institution? So not just in terms of the institutional level, also the personal level. What does it say about that collective character, the
Yeah.
people and the institution, if your values change depending on who's in office? You either have a value or you don't have a value. And then just don't fool yourself. Okay. So if yours like, we don't have any values, run with that. Okay. I won't agree with it, but don't go for the okie doke and think you're Jedi mind tricking me and pulling the wool over my eyes. But a lot of people lack courage, you know, and what I like to say, what's happening right now is profiles in no courage. They have no courage whatsoever. They're feckless. They're morally bankrupt. And I think it is really unfortunate. And I also think, like, in terms of what's happening with the attack on institutions, whether it be like Harvard University or Columbia, both of my alma maters, whether it be law firms, big law, also the lane that I was in, you know, or whether it be like, you know, some other sector of the economy, right? As these things are under attack, there's so many people that are just sitting back, waiting for someone else to be their sake, waiting for someone else to step up in a position of leadership in this moment in time. And the reality is, we all have to save ourselves. If you care about something, if you care about something in your community, if you care about a right, if you care about a privilege, if you care about education, diversity, healthcare, abortion, whatever it is, if you want certain things to stick around, you have to take the bull by the horns. And you
Yeah.
have to get involved. Even within these corporations, they're like, well, that's not what we do. We just make soda, or we're just making sneakers. Okay, well, you still have impact. You're not living in and running a business in a bubble. And none of that will matter if what you're doing doesn't operate in a full, thriving democratic economy, because there are a lot of indicators, like indicators that talk about the value of a democracy, and democracies are like 25% positive impact on GDP. So I do think that these people in these organizations need to care about some bigger issues.
I can't agree more. So, one of my questions is really about what insights about the power dynamics that most business leaders don't understand, and how much money is on the table.
Well, I can't say like a specific dollar amount other than like the broader economic indicators, right? So not just the impact on GDP when you're operating in a democracy, but you also have these for like diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI, when you have organizations that are more racially diverse, that are more gender diverse, there are all of these pro-business case indicators that more diverse institutions have a higher return on investment and equity. They've got lower employee turnover rates. They've got higher employee morale and job satisfaction. They've got higher referral rates, meaning that people refer their organization to people in their network for jobs. They're more innovative. They're more profitable. That's the bottom line. They are more profitable. They're also more desirable as an employer of choice. So these people that are running these companies, they've heard these data points before. They're just not moved by them. I think some of them are not moved by it because they're concerned about the political wins. I think some of it is because some of the people running these organizations, they don't care. And when I say they don't care, what they really want is to maintain their own male-centered, white-centered economic structure. But that is detrimental to the economy. I talk about this actually where I talk about how racism hurts white people too. This is, a detractor to economic growth and progress in the United States when we are anti-DEI, when we are anti-inclusion, when we are anti-diversity, right? And so diversity is the United States' competitive economic advantage relative to other countries. We are more diverse than other places. That is one of the reasons why our economy grows and thrives, and we have so much innovation here. It isn't just because it's simple to start a business here relative to like France, where you have to jump through endless hoops. It's also because we have such a diversity of perspective and thought and gender mixed with race and all of that leads to like better products, better services, better ways to deliver something for customers. And that makes the economy thrive, and that makes a company more profitable.
So, starting a consulting firm is a massive risk, right? Most consultants struggle to scale beyond themselves. How did you really build the Azara Group into something that advises Fortune 500 companies and billion-dollar executives. These aren't kids. This isn't the beginning. You really are in the room.
A lot of it really has to do with my network. I've leveraged my network. I've spent a lot of time and effort cultivating a network, which serves to bring in clients. And I deliver high value services for my clients. One of the things too is I have a broader perspective. I'm advising a client. So you could have people who go in and they're lawyers. You could have people that go in and they negotiate. You have people that may focus on talent management issues or diversity issues or conflict resolution or collaboration chaos when people are ineffective in meetings and all this other stuff. And that's the lane that they're in. That's what they're good at. That one lane. When somebody hires me, they're getting somebody who is a negotiator, an attorney. Even if I'm not giving legal advice on something, I still come with that analytical mind that's assessing risk for an organization when I'm advising them. Somebody who's a strategist. I'm coming in with this broad range of skills to best advise my clients and to help get them where they need to be. And also one of the things that I really like and appreciate being on the outside is that gives me more leverage to just straight up say the truth to people. I don't say what they want to hear. I say what they need to hear. And sometimes I have very difficult conversations. I remember speaking with a client that was I would say Fortune 100, maybe Fortune 50 company. And I came in to do a project. And in the course of doing that project, like this wasn't even like in the wheelhouse of what the specific project was, but I learned things along the way about their team and their leadership. And they had a very senior person on the team where, when you come in from the outside, like people are going to tell you things that they won't tell people internally. And one person was like, yeah, that person uses the N-word. That person also says really sexist and misogynist things. And so I remember speaking with the leadership, obviously not with that person, and saying like, okay, FYI, you need to fire this person. You have a toxic person on your team who is a liability. And I encourage you to heed my warning. If not, if you get hit with a lawsuit or a class action, don't say you weren't warned. And you actually deserve it at that point, because I'm telling you now, you have somebody who is a self-declared racist and a misogynist.
I have to tell you, this comes from a very personal space that I understand both. And I also have been the canary in the coal mine for both. Doubling down on that, in your book, Race Rules, one of the greatest things that comes out of this is that you talk about how business strategy is a perspective. How does understanding social and power dynamics that others miss give you an advantage when you're negotiating with these C-suite executives?
I think it is imperative for people to always think about who they are negotiating with. I think there's something really interesting that I think about for my book, Race Rules, What Your Black Friend Won't Tell You. And just to give, the people that listen to this a sense of what this book is, it is a how-to advice, right? So you have a lot of people who may talk about what racism is, how it shows up in society. Maybe it's more of like a memoir, autobiographical, maybe either talking about history, systems, and structures. And then somebody could read that and then they really understand how racism has manifested itself in society over time. And then what? Then they just go on to doing their jacked up stuff that they do anyway, right? And I'm in the advice game. And so I was like, you know what? The world does not need another book where somebody inserts themselves into the story, making it autobiographical, and then talking about how they negatively experience things in their life. No, what people need is what to do, what not to do, why shouldn't I do it, and with some advice, right? I have translation charts. You said this, we heard this, why don't you say this instead? Everything is about giving people advice to make better choices. I have illustrations for each of my 31 race rules because studies show that people retain information more with like a visual cue.
Absolutely.
And this book helps people connect across differences. It was written like the you in my writing is a white person, but it's also helpful for people of color because it validates experiences. It gives words to people's feelings and experiences. So that might help them in conversations. And then I also consider this book like an F you, go away, please leave me alone book. Stop asking me questions. Give me some peace. You have a question. This lady answered it. Just read what she had to say, right? So that's how I consider the book. I bring this whole thing up because when somebody goes to Japan to negotiate a business deal, Before they go to Japan, they're going to think, you know what? I think I need to know something about the Japanese people. I need to understand their history, their culture. What are some norms so that when I go there to negotiate or develop a relationship, and keep in mind, negotiating is not always like you across the table and negotiating deal terms. It's like building a relationship, marginal influence here and there. To me, it's all a negotiation. And so they'll go there and be like, you know what? I need to read a book. I need to understand something before I go there so I don't just, screw this up. But they never, ever think about having that same level of cultural competency within the context of their own country, so they can get along better and better navigate relationships with their superior, their peer, a subordinate, somebody on the other side. And so what race rules does in explaining some of these things, it helps people better navigate relationships across differences. I see this book helpful for people going off to college, graduating from high school, entering the workforce, salespeople, marketing people, negotiators, lawyers, right? Because you have to operate within the confines of this multiracial, multicultural, multi-ethnic American society. Why not equip yourself with a roadmap, some tools, some tips, so that you can do that in a way where you're not unknowingly the vector of racial harm and just being this offensive person? It's interesting. We're in this time in American history where being offensive is welcomed. We're like rounding up immigrants and sending them overseas without due process. We are intentionally being verbally belligerent to people, whether that is on social media or in the workplace. There's a rise in incivility. There's these data points, I can't even remember the number, like millions of incidents of incivility every single day, costing the economy $2 billion. I think it's like 100 something million incidents. I can't even remember, but it's rising. It's been continually rising. And like in Q1 of this year, it went up by 20 something percentage points, from the previous quarter. Don't quote me on all these stats because I'm just, ballparking them off of memory. We have this rise in incivility. It's toxic. It's terrible. But you know what? You still have to deal with your neighbor. You still have to deal with the customer. You still have to deal with a client. You still have to deal with someone in your own family. And you still have to deal with the people in your workplace. So we have this rise in incivility, but you still need to know how to navigate it. And so a book like Race Rules helps people restore civility and decency and respect in how they interact with other people. Because at the end of the day, do you really want to be disrespectful all the time?
What do they completely misunderstand about how influence people that look, sound, and may be different than who they are?
I think they don't get it. I think that is the reality. I think they don't get that they don't get it. I think that is the core. They think they're doing okay, or they just don't care, and they're not thinking long range. I'm going to give you an example. People in organizations don't always think about like what's happening down the line. So here's an example, a real example of, something that happened at a big law firm. And the model is like a pyramid, model to the top, or kind of like banking too. It's like crabs in a barrel, just fighting your way to make it to partner. And so they hire a lot at the lower level. And then like people start weeding out over time, whether they leave because it's not the lifestyle for them, or they decide to go in-house or put out their own shingle or change profession altogether, quietly told that they're not going to make partner. Not everyone, if you have like an incoming class at a big firm of 100 associates, those people are not going to make partner. Maybe 10 max, 5 out of that class or something might end up making partner eventually. And you have a lot of partners because frankly, in law school, they don't teach you how to manage people. They don't teach you how to lead. They don't teach you interpersonal skills. So a lot of these partners, they may know the law. They may know how to litigate. They may know how to negotiate something, but they really don't know how to lead people in a respectful way. And they may not think about the ramifications of how they interact with the associates underneath them that they're training. And so they may be racist in how they interact with people, or sexist in how they interact with people. So there's this one person who was a senior associate at a big firm, and she worked with this big fish partner who brought in a whole bunch of money and made it rain. at the firm. And he routinely did things unknowingly, most likely. And she felt that the way that he interacted with her was both racist and sexist. And she never forgot. So she eventually leaves the firm and goes in-house to a major corporation that was a client of the firm. Soon as she went in-house, like she couldn't bat that partner away fast enough. Okay. He was just, coming around, trying to like be, the little irritating buzzy bee in her ear when she could like barely get adequate attention from him other than toxic attention from him when she was working on his deals at the firm. And she was like, oh no, bruh, this ain't happening. He didn't just not get more business from her. She moved all the business away from that firm or from that partner because she never forgot. She never forgot how he treated her. It's like what Maya Angelou says, people may not remember what you said, but they will remember how you made them. She felt disrespected. So a lot of these people, to your question, they're not perceiving and understanding how they are disrespecting people and how that's having an impact, not just on the training of people underneath them and not just on the brand of that organization, but it's having impact on whether or not you're going to be able to maintain that cash flow from a certain client or get, future work. And when people leave these organizations, they are the ambassadors as alumni of your institution, whether that be a major financial services firm, a hedge fund, a movie production studio, whatever it is, people are going to be like, well, what was that experience like? And if they're like, it was like hot trash,
On a
stuff every day. And they don't think about that. They really don't think about that.
I think that says something about soft power. What would you say to somebody who needs to understand the concepts around what soft power is and how to utilize that to your advantage, especially if you don't have a title? How do you use that to go ahead and bend the knee or bend the ear?
I think part of it really starts with respecting people at every layer of the pecking order. There are a lot of people who will go to a major organization and they'll treat the secretary like shit. Okay. They will treat the mail guy who delivers the packages within the organization like crap. They'll treat, some junior person like crap. Well, that bubbles up. People will talk about it. I feel like you need to respect people at all levels, but there are some dividends that come from that. I remember when I was at Citigroup and I was always really nice to the executive assistant, to the guy that was running the investment bank. It was not as hard as it might have been for some people to get on his calendar. She is the gatekeeper to the man's schedule. Why are you going to disrespect the lady?
Absolutely. But I think that actually is a benefit and something that I admire from you is the fact that you put very clear boundaries in the sand with everybody that you met. Not harsh boundaries, not mean boundaries. These are just very clear things of what you will and will not do. Starting a consulting firm, huge risk, right? Going out and hanging your own shingle. Most consultants struggle to scale beyond themselves. How did you really build out that?
I think it really was sitting back and recognizing like, what am I good at? I built it because I've leveraged my personal network from the different places that I've worked. I've leveraged my Wellesley, Harvard, Columbia network. I've leveraged professional organization networks that I'm a member of. I've leveraged networks from going to conferences. I stay in touch with people. I send out, it's very costly, but I send out in the mail Christmas cards every single year. I don't feel bad about reaching out to people sometimes if I haven't seen them in a long time because well, you still get those Christmas cards like clockwork. So I'm still staying in touch with you. So it really is spending a lot of time and effort on your network and then sitting back and recognizing like what you're good at and what are you passionate about and trying to find that, that match. Sometimes it is taking some financial hits. I've had companies come to me. I had a major fashion company come to me wanting me to help them with some performative, diversity thing. And I was like, I'm not the one. Yeah, it would have been nice to say that I worked with that major fashion house, but no. Because you want I'm not the rubber stamp lady. I'm not going to validate your bullshit. I'm not that, that person. I mean, and the things that I'm focused on now with where I see, a threat to democracy and the rule of law in this country, I've also made some decisions that are not as economically rewarding in the short term because I am deeply patriotic and care about the direction of this country. And honestly, my, writing race rules was also an act of patriotism, wanting to make society better.
Actually, how did you calculate that risk versus reward? And did you gain clients or did you lose them from taking that direction?
Say that I lost any clients from like writing the book. I would say that there are some clients where it's less of a fit because these companies are afraid in this current environment where there's an attack on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and saying anything about anything related to race is taboo for them. But, the conditions in their organizations haven't changed just because the political tides have changed. They still have all of those same problems. They're just not necessarily wanting to deal with them. And then they may have backlash, like Target, where people are like, we're not going to shop there anymore. Or some of these big law firms that have bent the knee, and some of these large corporations that said, you know what, we don't need you to be our outside counsel anymore. Or some of their top partners have publicly or quietly left and taken their book of business with them. So there are definitely impacts when you seek to live your values and your principles. But I think it's important for people to decide like what kind of lane they want to be in.
All right, I have two more questions. One is, of course, thinking about how you continue to push forward your family and your history and your legacy, what the American dream means. What excites you going forward?
What concerns me is that I believe that our democracy is under threat, and there are not enough people realizing the gravity of that threat. Right? They're engaged in exceptionalism, which is a traditional psychological response to many things, right? Even when you think about racism, people are like, well, racism is always over there, right? Whereas in my book, I'm like, no, I'm trying to show you how it is literally in your own home and in your own mind. And so people engage in this exceptionalism thinking that what has happened in Hungary or what has happened in Germany or whatever can't happen here because somehow we are the exception to the rule. And that fuels inertia. And that it fuels some people just coasting, sitting back, being freeloaders on the hard work that other people are doing, right? People like to look back and be like, oh, Martin Luther King was like a great person, but he maybe had like 15-20% of the support of the public, right? But then in retrospect, more people claim that they went to the March on Washington that actually went to the March on Washington. Or they twist what he stood for, where he actually didn't stand for a colorblind society. He was for reparations. He was for affirmative action. When he started to be more radical, that's when he got shot. But he said a country that has done something special to the Negro must now do something special for the Negro. That is a call for reparations and affirmative action and DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives, right? So what I'm worried about is the people just sitting back thinking that someone else will be their savior or leader and they don't have to do anything. What gives me hope is that in spite of all that, where you have scholars saying that our democracy may not survive 20, right, at the pace that we're going, you have people that say, okay, I see what is happening. I see all of this terrible stuff and I'm still pushing back. I'm still going to protest. I'm still making my manager have to answer to why they're getting rid of their affinity groups. I'm still pushing for something in my community. I'm still calling my Republican senator, who I know won't support what I support, just to keep calling. And so what I find hopeful is that, when they had some of these protests, like the No Kings protest was it June 14th or whatever it was, millions of people came out. Now the news is not showing it, which is a problem, but millions of people are still finding ways to take action in their own community. People that you wouldn't expect, people who voted for Trump, right? Because they're like, wait a minute, the guy who works at the bagel shop that I go to every day, who like is not a criminal, somehow just disappeared and is in some detention center. And, like, why is he there? He was nice. I like the way that he toasted my bagel. Whatever it is, those people are showing up, protesting and saying like, this is not right. More and more people are taking from that adage or that line, from that, what is it, Pieter Noormer, whatever his name was. He was like a Protestant minister during World War II. And he was sent to a concentration camp who said, I'm going to mess up this. Like first they came for the trade unionists. I wasn't a trade unionist, so I said nothing. Then they came, for the communists. I wasn't a communist, so I said nothing. Then they came for, the laborers. I wasn't a laborer, so I said nothing. Then they came for the Jews, and I wasn't a Jew, so I said nothing. And then they came for me. And there was
And by that point, there was no one left.
Nobody left to speak out. So there are some people that are living by that in big ways and in small ways. And I find, that definitely gives me hope.
So, final question before we get to your excellent excerpt from your book. How is it that you would say that there's one thing that if they were to pay attention to would help to bridge that gap across this segmentation that's happening in the world right now?
So if I understand your question, you're asking me what people can do to bridge the gap with the fracturing that's taking place?
That's correct.
I think first and foremost, what people need to do is recognize that each of us plays an individual role. That there are things that have it, like it's the adding up, the multiplier effect of micro actions and decisions that then have a macro impact. So it's important the daily decisions that you make, how you interact with people, whether that's in your family, whether that's at the grocery store, whether that's at your workplace. We have individual power. And if we don't like what is happening, then, change. If you don't like that people say nasty things on social media, then you shouldn't also say nasty things on social media. If you don't like how people tear other people down, then don't participate. I think at the end of the day, what everybody wants is respect, decency, kindness, and appreciation for their humanity. So if you deal with other people with respect, and you deal with them with kindness, then we will make some impact. And dealing with people with respect and kindness means speaking to them in a different kind of way. And then if you do something that is offensive, then try to understand why that was offensive if you don't get it, right? Like take the extra steps. And if you offend somebody, then apologize. And I will say, I have a chapter in my book that tells people how to apologize. What is actually a part of an apology? And not the backhanded, pulled it back, bullshit apology. And so there are a lot of lessons in my book. The light bulb moment that I had for this book was that I was watching the news one day, and it was another story of a Karen going viral for calling the police for no reason. And when that happened, I thought about the rinse and repeat questions that I get from clients, the repetitive blunders that I've seen friends and clients do, the ignorance, knowing and unknowing what are mistakes that could be made. And then I thought about the things that white people say around me when they don't realize I'm Black. And I had this light bulb aha moment. I was like, oh, white people need a manual. They need a manual. So I started writing race rules, which is the quiet part out loud. Right? Because if somebody's going to learn, somebody's got to rip the Band-Aid off and say that quiet part out loud, that difficult part out loud. And so that's what I did. So I'm going to read you this excerpt. And so this is from my race rule, where the rule is it's not personal when people of color don't want to discuss race. And remember, the you in my writing is a white person, even though it's helpful for other people. And this is the illustration that goes with it, right? So it's like Sisyphus going up that hill. So here we go. So it's not personal when people don't want to discuss race. And at the end of the chapter, I say what it's like talking to you about race. Let's put this in perspective. Recall life living in the pandemic. Do you remember that haunting feeling you felt that never went away? That the virus was lurking at every corner. You couldn't escape it because there were reminders everywhere, on the news, online, in social media, and when you saw your neighbors or people on the street. You felt a sense of omnipresence as you walked around, always on high alert, looking at others, seeing if they wore masks, looked ill or coughed. You noticed them and observed how they reacted to you. You are in constant fear of your death. Loved ones may die or did die, and you felt perpetual anxiety. Your mental health was impacted along with your physical health from the stress. You had trouble sleeping. You weren't even safe in your own home because the virus could come to your door. You didn't know if you could trust the government or if officials had your best interests at heart, unsure if they would do something to kill you. You felt powerless, as if there were nothing you could do to change things to make your life better since you weren't in control. You had to resign yourself to your circumstance, but you didn't want to accept your reality. You wanted to resist and somehow make things better. When you tried, you didn't succeed. That's what it's like living under racism every day, 24/7, 365. Visible force, just like COVID. There's no escape. It's constant, never a break and reprieve. It's isolating and marginalizing. It attacks your life, bank account, livelihood, housing, healthcare, schools, and dinner table, and separates your family. You want the government to do something about it, but politicians want you to laissez-faire your way to non-solutions, absolving themselves of responsibility, willfully blind to its impact. You suck it up. You do it. Picture systemic issues. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Heal yourself. Pave your destiny. Avoid your own death or murder. Welcome to living like a Black or brown person in America. But with racism, there's no vaccine coming. No magic pill to inoculate society. This is what it's been like since the 1500s. It isn't getting better. There are new strains, new waves, and invisible resurgences, mutating, reinventing itself, seemingly dormant but always there stalking, ready to strike and viciously kill. This is the reality. It's belief. So when you want to discuss racism, sometimes people of color only want to discuss it with those who understand what they've gone through, not white folks who trivialize things, which is akin to speaking to an anti-masker who berates innocent and defenseless store clerks. That's you questioning racism and their experiences. You're the anti-masker, anti-vaxxer in the conversation. When you come with covert microaggressions, overt aggression, a lack of knowledge, and a rejection of facts, how can you understand why no one wants to talk to you? They're already too busy trying to literally survive.
We may not be the hero in the story, but we are definitely the survivor. And we all know one thing: survivors are the ones who write the history. This has been Confluently. If you're getting value from these conversations about how power influence actually works in business, hit this button and leave us a review. I'm Tiffany Hart. Tune into more insights to come, and I'm the fuck out.